Baby, this is what you came for. Lightning strikes every time she moves.
We have decided to explore Singapore and find out the opinions of fellow Singaporeans on whether we are creative or not. Additionally, we interviewed Playum's executive director, Miss Anna Salaman, for her thoughts.
Playum is an independent registered charity that champions children through play and creativity. According to the Merriam-Webster Dictionary, creativity is defined as the ability to make new things or think of new ideas. This does not only apply to artistic abilities, but also in conventional activities in our daily lives.
Are Singaporeans creative?
Let's find out!
We decided to conduct an online survey to find out what people think of the creative landscape in Singapore. 55% of the respondents agreed that Singapore does not allow space for creativity to thrive. However, we noticed that Singapore's creativity is ranked highly by the same respondents.
This brings us to believe that Singaporeans are indeed creative, though they do not believe that themselves.
What do you think is hindering Singaporeans from exploring solutions creatively?
Well, a lot of Singaporeans are exploring solutions creatively. Loads. I mean, I already mentioned the Ground Up initiative and the Maker community. These are really significant initiatives within Singapore, and they've got huge communities. So there's people in Singapore who are being incredibly creative and pursuing that in all their spare time that they've got, or making professional careers out of it as well. And then you've also got a very creative graphic design industry and the creative industry, what's called the creative industries generally, the kind of film and advertising and those kind of the harder side of the cultural sector. And you've got a thriving art scene, and you've got a load of very talented artists. And so I would actually argue that there is a lot of creative pursuits going on within the Singaporean context. But as with any culture, there's a lot of people who aren't pursuing creative interests. It may be because they don't want to, they're more interested in sport or whatever it is. But then they even themselves may be approaching things creatively, I don't know. So on what basis, I would ask you back, are you assuming that there isn't a creative pursuit generally amongst Singaporeans?
Seems like Anna and our survey results agree that Singaporeans are becoming creative. Let's take a step further and go to the streets and ask what do people think about it.
Singapore is a creative society. Singapore is changing lah. It used to be like very focused on the paper qualifications and everything, but people are starting to look into other career options like chef and artists and things like that. Yeah.
The people that we asked on the street do think that Singaporeans are creative and that it was just a matter of time for our creativity to improve.
So how are we going to further nurture creativity in Singapore?
I think there's a lot they can do within their household in very practical terms, in ways that everyone can grasp. And creativity can take lots of shapes and forms, but one way that everyone can understand and implement is giving children the opportunity to make things from scratch, because there's a lot of benefits that come from that. So if you have single components, whether it's kind of recycled materials, elastic bands, glue, paper clips or something like that, and you're just tinkering, so you're just kind of putting things together and making stuff, that's been evidenced to do a whole lot of good stuff and be conducive to creativity, but also benefit education. So if we can persuade Singaporean parents that this actually is beneficial to the formal education that the child is going to have and how they receive it, all the better. And some of those benefits are in a very practical way, learning how to put single components together to make a whole. It's good for the brain. Using your own imagination, and so you're working from a concept into reality. There's also benefits there. it's been shown to, as the child gets absorbed, as long as they're not told what they should be doing and it's their own choice, as the child gets more absorbed, their focus and their attention span is increased, and that's been shown to be applicable to other things they do at school as well. And they also become more confident about doing stuff. They believe in themselves more. And so that self-confidence as a learner also applies to other areas in school. And finally, perhaps in this area, they learn how that failure is not an end in itself, but actually part of the process. So as they decide, let's say they decide to make a rocket out of a plastic bottle and some card and some glue, they may cut the card and try and stick it onto the bottle, and it may not work, and they're going to need to come up with some solutions of how to make it work, because the glue that they're using isn't great, let's say, but they've also got rubber bands and they've also got paper clips, and with a bit of tinkering and a bit of encouragement, hands-off encouragement, they may then start solving that. And it's really that skill, that working through a creative process and understanding that there's problem solving within that process, which you could also see as kind of mini failures in that process, that makes a very mature learner. So that's invaluable. That's the thing. I think that, together with the confidence as a learner, I think is the most important thing you can offer children to do simply by tinkering with a range of objects. So to go back to your question about how Singaporean parents can encourage this in the home, they can make space physically. They can make a space half the size of this table where they have, say, baskets of things bought from Daiso. Doesn't have to be expensive. They could have corks, they could have paper clips, they could have rubber bands, they could have chopped up bits of card, they could have bottle tops, and then they could have a box nearby with recycled stuff like plastic bottles or other plastic items. Then they could just have it there with no agenda. But then they could also start modelling behaviour. If the child's at a bit of a loss, which would surprise me, but let's say they are at a bit of loss, or the television's over there and it's competing with their time, the parent could start playing with this and putting something together themselves. And modelling behaviour is a very conducive way of getting children involved, because they start kind of coming over and going, what are you doing? And then before you know it, they're also wanting to have a go. So if that area is physically in the home on a long-term basis, the child will get creatively literate.
We ran a social experiment in which a phone, markers, paper, and a Lego set were left in a box for children to pick. A phone is less interactive than the materials we provided the children, and this prevents the growth of creativity at a young age.
The markers and Lego allows children to tinker and go through a trial and error process. As mentioned by Anna, it's a practical way of promoting creativity. All of the children that we asked picked markers as the toy that they play with the most.
While we were conducting our social experiment, a parent brought up an important point. She mentioned that she will never control what her child wants to play with, but instead, she would encourage exploration and freedom.
Since Singaporean parents encourage their children to tinker with interactive materials, we can say that Singaporeans are creative with the support of the parents.
Yes, it's definitely conducive to creativity, and you get humans at the beginning of their lives, and you give them those opportunities, because what you're giving them is not something kind of literal, but an approach, a way of viewing things, a way of seeing, an interdisciplinary view of the world, and where they're engaging with tangible things in their own agenda. All of these are really important factors of creativity. And that will then have an impact on them as adults. It's been proven to.
A study done by the professor at the University of Kansas says that the more time you spend outdoors, the greater the creativity. Another study by the Wilderness Society, based in Washington, D.C., also agrees that time spent outdoors will increase creative thinking. And here's what Anna has to say about Singaporeans spending time outdoors.
But funnily enough, when I first moved here, I was really surprised to see just how many Singaporean adults were engaging with the outside, because largely through sport. Singaporeans are very sporty. So I live near the East Coast, and I just see thousands of people running, cycling, wheeling along on something, or they're in the sea, or much more, because of the climate, I think much more than in the UK, way more. And so I would actually say there's a lot of engagement with the outdoors. Whether or not it's creative engagement, who knows?
In our survey, we asked if people would rather spend their time indoors or out. A 55% majority said outdoors, and 47% of which said that they spend more than 4 hours a week outside.
Do you think that outdoor activities can actually spur you to become more creative in life?
Yes.
Now that we got the data, we can say that Singaporeans are creative.
We found something curious while doing the street interviews.
Tuition or
Will be the tuition. Yeah.
do you think creativity is an important skill to have?
Yes.
Maybe you can elaborate on why?
Because nowadays I think for creation is quite popular for. I mean, a lot of people will go for this line instead of go for classes only for study or whatever. Yeah.
Some said that they would rather bring their children to academic tuition classes rather than enrichment classes. However, they claim that creativity is important in Singapore. We can then infer that Singaporeans are still not willing to explore creativity to the highest potential.
The Caucasian man we interviewed mentioned that he would rather allow his child to go for arts enrichment classes rather than tuition classes because he believes that schools are doing enough to supplement a child's academic needs.
I'd rather go for enrichment because I think it gets enough education academically as it is.
We can understand and observe that Singaporeans are indeed creative. Even though we have a small population, Singaporeans can still prove to be creative as seen from our creative industry, updating education systems, and entrepreneurship successes. The street interviews and social experiments we have conducted supports our stand that Singaporeans are creative as well.
The people that we asked agreed that Singaporeans are creative, and children are nurtured in the right environment. Singaporeans also spend time outdoors to activate creativity, and this is why we can conclude that Singaporeans are creative.
However, we also acknowledge that some may not value the unconventional or that the Singaporean soil may not be the best for creativity to thrive. Nonetheless, innovations of the country's minds will aid Singapore to evolve. Ultimately, we stand strong with the fact that Singaporeans are indeed creative.
We would like to thank Playum for allowing us to film on their premises and Miss Anna Solomon, the Executive Director of Playum, for being so hospitable and kind during the interview session.
Additionally, we would also like to thank everyone who participated in our street interview, as well as the social experiment. Your feedback has been invaluable to our documentary.
This is very deserted. Afi? Are you kidding me? Afia?
Oh, sorry.
Afia? Can you put it back?
Let's start from here on.
Yes, that's creative.
My god. Cake is so good. So I was so surprised. Arlene, it's Jennifer.
Oh, look at that.
Oh, hi!